Hi, I'm Kevin Rusnak, the Chief Historian of the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. Welcome to the latest video in our Out of the Hangar series. This one is looking at the 100th anniversary of the first successful coast-to-coast Dawn-to-Dusk flight. I'm joined on the other end of the conversation here by Joe from the Public Affairs Office. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Kevin. Great to be with you. Excited about the story.
Great. Yeah, it's an interesting one that has a very relevant connection to what we're doing today in the Air Force. The Secretary of the Air Force has come up with what he calls his operational imperatives, kind of the key things that we're focusing on today. One of those is what we call Operational Imperative 7, or a readiness to deploy and fight. Well, they were thinking of this same idea 100 years ago, because then they were really trying to figure out what should an air service, that was the name for what's now the Air Force, back then do? What was their role in national defense? Well, there was a lot of argument about this coming out of World War I, especially, but they hadn't really settled on a role for that everybody bought into. But one of the kind of ideas that they were thinking is that, hey, could this air service, could we use airplanes to be the linchpin of national defense? Say if the United States was attacked on either the East Coast or the West Coast by a foreign navy, how could we defend against that? Well, the leadership of the air service thought, you know what, if we have airplanes that are agile and fast, we could deploy them from anywhere in the United States to any other part of the United States much more quickly than the Army or the Navy could get there. And so one of their pilots had this idea that fed right into this. Hey, he was going to prove that they could fly an airplane from one coast to the other in less than 24 hours, what they call this coast to coast, dawn to dusk flight. And so this idea came down to the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center's predecessor that you see here in the picture, the engineering division at McCook Field in Dayton, Ohio. Well, that place is closed now. We're moved over to here to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where I am today. But that was really the kind of center for Air Force acquisition activities, but then also to research and development, like what the modern Air Force Research Laboratory does today. There's just a good aerial picture of it. McCook Field is the buildings that are kind of on the left here, and its flying field is in the river. And then at the top is downtown Dayton. So that's where all this interwar period technology development for Army, military, aviation, that's where this all happened. And that's where the kind of legwork behind this transcontinental, less than 24 hours flight came down. And the key person here was the guy you see in this picture, Lieutenant Russell Maughan. He had been a rancher out in Utah that signed up for the Air Service to go fight in World War One. He originally joined the infantry, but quickly was moved over to the Air Service and became a fighter pilot. He shot down 4 enemy airplanes during the war, had a quite distinguished record, but he chose to stay in the service even after the war was over. And he found himself assigned to McCook Field for a little while, as well as to some operational units. But he really made his name as an air racer. And the Air Service was participating in national air races and international air races because it was a great opportunity for the military to kind of ring out its technology, to show what it could do on an international stage. And, you know, that kind of publicity was good for trying to get money to improve the Air Service at a time where Congress was not interested in spending a lot of money on military of any kind, much less all these kind of newfangled airplanes. So Maughan at one point set speed records. You could say he was the fastest man alive, a little over 200 miles an hour. I think it was 236 miles an hour. Doesn't seem like much now, but back then it was a pretty big deal. So at some point he got in his head that this kind of transcontinental, coast to coast, dawn to dusk flight would be a good idea. Now people had flown that distance before, and even in 1923, they two men had done it nonstop, but it took them something like 26 or 29 hours. He wanted to do it in a faster airplane to prove that it could be done, you know, from sunrise on the East Coast to sunset on the West Coast. So in early 1923, he's the guy here in uniform. He approached this other person that you see in the picture, General Mason Patrick, the head of the Air Service, with the idea. Patrick approved the mission, and they got him set up with a Curtiss PW-8, this airplane that you'll see actually in a couple of pictures here, to go fly from, as you see in this picture, from Long Island, New York, across the country, including stopping in McCook Field, and landing in San Francisco. He was going to use this frontline fighter plane. Now here it is, this Curtiss PW-8 that was kind of based on the air racer that he had set his records in. Curtiss used a lot of those technologies that it had proved in these air races to create a pretty good fighter plane at the time. And that's actually Maughan there with the plane. And this is the plane that he was going to make that attempt in. So his first shot at it was on July 9th, 1923. He sets up in Long Island. He takes off. He makes it to McCook Field. But then, unfortunately, as he's flying across Missouri, he has mechanical problems. He's forced to land. His airplane kind of cracks up on landing. And so that ends his flight here. And that's the headline you see. But because he had done such a good job, Patrick immediately approved another attempt, basically as soon as they could do it. Literally 10 days later, the airplane was fixed back in Long Island, and Maughan was going to take off and do it again. So if you're looking back at that map, this time he takes off from New York, makes it through McCook Field, past Missouri, heading for Cheyenne, but he's got to stop and get his airplane fixed. He hits the air again. Unfortunately, his airplane oil cooler goes out on him, sprays oil all over the airplane, chokes him. He's forced to land, and that ends that attempt. As you might imagine, he was a little bit crushed by this, but he thought that, well, the third time's a charm. I'm going to get to do it again. It turns out that that wasn't necessarily guaranteed. As summer was going along, he was losing those precious daylight hours. The Army kind of was going to spend money doing other things, so he was put off for the time being, uncertain whether or not he was going to get that third chance. Well, fast forward to the following spring, the spring of 1924. He again approaches Mason Patrick and says, hey, can we take another shot at this? They say, yeah, sure, it's a good idea. Go ahead and do the planning. They set up exactly what they were going to do before. He's using a different version of the same airplane. He's going to do it. His first, Mason Patrick actually meets him up at Long Island for his takeoff. Now this time they're doing it in June of 1924. But unfortunately, bad weather, they get fog there, delays them a day. But on June 23rd, almost exactly 100 years ago, as I'm recording this, he managed to take off. He's using this plane here that you can see in the picture. As it says, it's on the side, Dawn-to-Dusk, coast to coast. He's going to do that. Well, it's hard to imagine what a big deal this was at the time, but he had crowds in New York following him. The newspapers were following him every step along the way. Even the president of the United States at the time had telegrammed to the various Army posts saying, keep me updated on the progress. So can you imagine that? You don't really see that for flights now, but this was really a big deal at the time. It had never been done before. So he makes a stop at McCook Field. Unfortunately, he's got a leaky fuel line that they've got to fix. He's stuck there for an hour, a little bit longer than he intended. But luckily, that was the only mechanical problem he had. He left McCook Field, and that's what you're seeing here in some of these pictures. He's waiting at McCook Field, watching his watch. Are they going to get it fixed in time? He takes off. He hits Missouri. He's fine. He makes it out to Wyoming. It's all good. And he's heading towards San Francisco. A little bit behind schedule because of that stop, but it looks like he's going to make it. And so a little bit after 9:30, about 22 hours after he took off, as the sun's disappearing over the horizon, man, he makes it. He lands at Crissy Field in San Francisco, really just across from the Golden Gate Bridge. That's what you see here. The Sun Racer arrives. Throng hails the aviator at Crissy Field. And when they say throng, they're not kidding. 40,000 people by their estimates were there waiting to greet him. So can you imagine that? So he literally, as his plane lands, all of these people break past the police barriers. They literally take him out of the cockpit, put him on his shoulders, and carry him around the field like a conquering hero. It was really, really quite amazing to contemplate. According to this, women were swooning, men were cheering, throwing their hats in the air. And as you can see from the picture, he was tired, but happy to have done it. And with him, he carried newspapers, physical newspapers from New York from that same day, June 23rd, 1924, and were able to hand deliver them in San Francisco on that same day, something that had never been done before. So this really not only was a huge publicity feat, it made headlines all across the country for that day and across the world even, but it had this kind of long-term effect of showing that, yes, the Air Service can do what it's promising to do. It can make this flight, within, one day to help defend the United States, but it also helped break those barriers for civil aviation, showing that that speedy transcontinental flight was possible for the military and for civilians, eventually paving the way for the airline industry that we enjoy now. And of course, all the airplane technologies that we used in World War II and later on. So there's our friend Russell Maughan again, a little bit later in his career. He went on to have his distinguished career after this, but this was probably the pinnacle of his historic achievements at the time, and ones that I think we're still benefiting from today as one of those early building blocks for modern aviation technology and capability. So, Joe, that's about all I had for this story today. Hopefully, our audience has learned a few things, and we'll see you next time for the next edition of the Out of the Hangar videos.